Jake Carter woke up with a throbbing headache and a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. His last memory was of his F-35 soaring over the Pacific, a routine training exercise before everything had gone dark. Now, instead of a cockpit, he was sprawled on a smooth, metallic floor beneath an eerie, pulsating light. His instincts kicked in, and he shot upright, scanning his surroundings. Glass. No, something like glass but not quite. Transparent walls curved around him in a way that felt unnatural, seamless, sterile. Beyond them, figures moved, tall, slender beings with elongated limbs and dark, reflective eyes. They peered at him with what could only be described as scientific curiosity, making notes on floating, holographic displays. Jake had been in survival situations before, but this was something else entirely. He pressed a palm against the barrier. It was cool to the touch, unyielding. His pulse quickened. He'd been captured. One of the creatures stepped forward, raising a spindly hand. The air vibrated with a series of melodic chirps and clicks. The thing was talking. Jake exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I don't speak spacebird. You got subtitles or what?" Silence. Then, a small, hovering drone zipped toward him, stopping inches from his face. A second later, a voice, calm, measured, filled the enclosure. "The specimen appears agitated but demonstrates cognitive function beyond baseline expectations. Further observation required." Specimen. Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't a rescue mission. He wasn't a prisoner of war. He was a damned science experiment. Days, or maybe weeks, blurred together inside his glass cage. The aliens, whom he mentally dubbed the Squidwards, due to their slick, almost translucent skin and tentacle-like appendages, treated him like an exotic pet. They weren't cruel, at least, not intentionally, but the patronizing way they observed his every move drove him insane. At first, they tested his responses to different stimuli, flashing lights, strange sounds, even a floating, gelatinous cube that tried to wrap around his hand before he swatted it away. They seemed fascinated by his ability to react with unpredictability. Food came in the form of colorful cubes, each one tasting wildly different. The red one was vaguely like chicken, the blue one was something like toothpaste and despair, and the yellow one. Well, the yellow one made him black out for 3 hours, so he avoided that. Jake wasn't alone in the enclosure. Various creatures, some resembling Earth's animals and others wholly alien, shared the space. A 6-legged fur ball that yipped like a malfunctioning Roomba followed him around. A serpentine being coiled lazily on a platform, occasionally giving Jake what felt like an unimpressed glance. "Well, buddy," Jake muttered to the snake thing one night. "Looks like we're both someone's science project." The creature flicked its tongue but otherwise ignored him. He started to piece things together. The Squidwards weren't just researchers, they were collectors. They traveled the stars, picking up lifeforms they found interesting. And apparently to them, humans weren't much different from the chittering creatures Jake had seen in zoos back on Earth. That didn't sit well with him. The first escape attempt was, let's just say, not his best work. Using a discarded feeding tray, he tried to pry open a panel near the floor, thinking it might be a maintenance hatch. It wasn't. The moment he applied pressure, a shrill alarm blared, and a shimmering blue energy field slammed him backward. A few moments later, 2 of the Squidwards approached, their heads tilting as they observed him from behind the glass. One of them made a series of clicks, and the drone translated. "The specimen exhibits problem-solving skills but lacks sufficient understanding of advanced containment protocols." "Fascinating." Jake sat up, rubbing his bruised ribs. "Glad you're entertained, E.T." From that point on, he realized brute force wasn't going to cut it. He needed to play the long game. He stopped resisting, at least outwardly. He let them think he was adapting, even growing docile. When they ran their tests, he participated, sometimes even playing along, just enough to make them lower their guard. He watched, listened, and learned. And most importantly, he waited. Because if these aliens thought they had tamed him, they were in for a hell of a surprise. Jake Carter had always been good at reading people. turns out, aliens weren't all that different. At first, he'd assumed the Velethians, his name for the Squidwards, were just scientists poking at their newest specimen. But as he observed them, he started to notice nuances in their behavior. They had hierarchy, subtle but clear. Some carried themselves with authority, while others slouched, deferential. Their communication wasn't just a jumble of clicks and hums, it had rhythm, tone, and intention. He began to pick up patterns. Short, sharp chirps meant commands. Low vibrations, almost too deep to hear, signaled annoyance or frustration. Bright flashes from the bioluminescent patches on their skin seemed to serve as punctuation. If they were a research species, they weren't just studying him, they were categorizing everything about him: behavior, intelligence, adaptability. So, he did what any good prisoner would do: he studied them right back. His first real breakthrough came when he realized they weren't paying as much attention to him anymore. The novelty of their human specimen had started to wear off. They still observed, still tested him, but he wasn't under constant watch. That meant he had time. He started mimicking their sounds when they weren't looking. Simple things at first, repeating their clicks under his breath, trying to match the hums and warbles. The first time he managed to copy one of their command chirps perfectly, he nearly laughed out loud. That's when he got the idea. If they saw him as a pet, he'd be the best damn pet they'd ever seen. Jake had never been one to play submissive, but in this case, playing along was the fastest way out. He started responding to their gestures with deliberate obedience. When they handed him an object, he examined it thoughtfully before returning it. When they pointed, he looked. When they made a certain sound before bringing food, he mimicked it back. At first, they were amused. Then they were impressed. One of the higher-ranking ones, a particularly tall Velethian with deep violet markings along its limbs, seemed to take special interest in him. It started bringing him more complex puzzles, metallic cubes that unfolded in strange ways, shifting spheres that required precise manipulation to open. Jake played along, solving them at just the right speed, not too fast to alarm them, but not so slow that they lost interest. The others started treating him differently. He was no longer just a curiosity, he was something more. A creature of unusual intelligence. And that meant he was getting closer to an opportunity. Professor Squid, as Jake had privately nicknamed the violet-marked alien, was clearly the smartest of the bunch. He was also the most suspicious. Jake noticed that while the other Velethians treated him like a clever pet, Professor Squid watched him with something else in his gaze. Doubt. One day, the professor set a new test before him, a complex puzzle with interlocking, shifting panels. Jake worked through it carefully, deliberately making a few mistakes before solving it. The moment he set it down, Professor Squid's bioluminescence flickered in a way Jake hadn't seen before. The alien turned and made a sharp, deliberate series of clicks. The translator drone hovered closer. The specimen exhibits pattern recognition and complex problem-solving at a level inconsistent with initial assessment. Further evaluation required. Jake met the alien's dark, reflective eyes and smirked. Yeah, you're catching on, aren't you? For the first time, the alien hesitated before leaving. Jake knew he was walking a fine line. If they realized he was learning their language, figuring out their technology, they might change tactics, lock him down, move him somewhere more secure. That meant it was time to move to Phase 2. Sabotage. It started small. He made tiny, unnoticeable modifications to his enclosure, adjusting a panel here, loosening a fixture there. When the feeding drones delivered his food cubes, he subtly nudged one of them into the locking mechanism of the gate. It wasn't enough to break it, but enough to jam it slightly, creating a fraction of a second delay when opening. He tested the alien's security systems by intentionally tripping minor alarms and observing their responses. When they dismissed certain errors as glitches, he made note of them. Then he started working on the doors. Using a discarded metal shard from one of the puzzle tests, he carefully experimented with the seams of the enclosure. He found where the magnetic locks engaged, where the control panels were housed. All the while, he kept up the act. He continued to perform tricks for his captors, continued to mimic their sounds and gestures. He even started responding to basic commands before they finished issuing them, making them think he was adapting to their language. The moment they saw him as trainable, they started giving him access to more of the ship. That was their mistake. One day, during what had become a routine observation session, he noticed something. A control panel left unsecured. A small, flickering holographic display showing ship schematics. He wasn't just in some floating research lab. He was on a warship. Jake leaned back against the glass, breathing slowly. This changed things. The Velithians weren't just alien scientists collecting odd creatures from the stars. They were part of something bigger. And if they thought they could keep a fighter pilot locked in a cage on their flagship, they were in for a rude awakening. The moment the Velithians discovered who he really was, Jake knew the game had changed. It started with a simple mistake, one he hadn't even made. Two of the aliens were accessing some kind of database near his enclosure, their glowing fingers sweeping through holographic projections, shifting symbols and images at speeds too fast for him to decipher. He wasn't supposed to be able to understand them, wasn't supposed to be paying attention. But then, Earth appeared on the display. Jake saw the familiar blue-green swirl, the continents outlined in data streams, and next to it, images, human military insignia, satellite imagery, even grainy footage of fighter jets in action. And then, his own face. His service records. His call sign. VIPER. The Velithians froze. Jake, who had been sitting idly on the floor, feigning boredom, slowly stood. He couldn't see their expressions, but he knew what fear looked like in any species. They hadn't captured just any human. They had captured one of Earth's most decorated pilots. A veteran of high-risk missions, a specialist in aerial combat, survival, and escape tactics. Jake took a step forward, just enough to make them flinch. "Surprise," he muttered. They scrambled away from the terminal, their clicks rapid and panicked. A sharp alarm echoed through the chamber. Jake smirked. That was the sound of recognition. They weren't dealing with a pet anymore. The response was immediate. His enclosure went into full lockdown, extra barriers materialized, security drones hovered closer, and armed guards appeared at the periphery. Jake rolled his shoulders. About time they took him seriously. The problem was, now that they knew who he was, he had to act fast. They wouldn't keep him as an amusement anymore. Either they'd try to extract more information, or they'd cut their losses and get rid of him before Earth could come looking. Time to accelerate the plan. He needed to get out. Now. With his cover blown, Jake shifted into action mode. He assessed the new security measures, scanning for weaknesses. The force fields were stronger, but they still had to deactivate momentarily when food was delivered. The drones, though armed, still operated on a predictable pattern. His first move was simple: misdirection. He feigned exhaustion, slumping against the wall, letting his breathing slow. The drones monitored vital signs, and he counted on their data-driven logic to work against them. A fatigued, resigned specimen wasn't a threat. When the food tray arrived, he moved fast. As the barrier flickered for a split second, he jammed a piece of the tray into the door's locking mechanism. It didn't stop the energy field from reactivating, but it delayed it, by just a fraction of a second. That was all he needed. With precision honed from years of split-second cockpit decisions, he surged forward. The delay in the system gave him just enough time to squeeze through before the barrier fully engaged again. The alarm blared louder. Drones whirred to life, weapons locking onto him. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed one of the floating feeding drones, ripped off a panel, and yanked out a handful of internal wiring. Sparks flew as the drone twitched and short-circuited. And just like that, he had his first weapon. He ducked as an energy blast sizzled past his shoulder. The Velithian guards were already moving in, their sleek, curved weapons glowing with charged plasma rounds. Jake grinned. He'd spent years dodging heat-seeking missiles at Mach speeds. This was nothing. He sprinted for cover, weaving between the strange, organic structures of the ship's interior. Every move he made was calculated, using his knowledge of their systems, their blind spots. He had spent weeks letting them underestimate him. Now he was using it against them. He reached a control terminal, the interface flickering with strange alien text. It didn't matter. He had already figured out enough of their symbols to recognize the basics: doors, environmental controls, security overrides. Jake cracked his knuckles. Let's see what happens when the pet takes the leash. Within seconds, he activated a cascade of malfunctions, shutting down secondary security doors, redirecting drone patrols, even triggering minor system failures in other parts of the ship to spread confusion. The ship trembled slightly as warnings echoed through the corridors. Velethians scurried in every direction, scrambling to contain what they thought was a random malfunction. But Professor Squid knew better. Jake saw the tall, violet-marked alien appear at the far end of the corridor, locking eyes with him. Unlike the others, Professor Squid wasn't panicked. He was studying Jake, assessing. Good. Let him. Because Jake was just getting started. He needed a way off this ship, and that meant finding their hangar, their transport vessels. He wasn't about to float aimlessly through space in an escape pod. He needed a real ship. Navigating through the maze of corridors, he moved with precision, ducking into shadows, listening for approaching guards. He found what he was looking for: a central command room, its walls lined with holographic star charts, alien script scrolling endlessly. And in the center of it all, the ship's AI interface. Jake placed a hand on the control console, exhaling slowly. This was it. If he could override navigation, he could set a course for Earth. He worked quickly, fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. It wasn't too different from hacking into an enemy system mid-flight. He just had to recognize the key sequences, find the logic beneath the alien design. Behind him, footsteps. Professor Squid. Jake didn't turn. You should have done your research before you took me. A pause. Then, in surprisingly clear English. We did not expect VIPER. Jake grinned. Yeah. That was your first mistake. Then he slammed his hand down on the final command input. The ship lurched violently. Engines roared to life. Alarms blared across the vessel. Jake had just taken control of an entire alien warship. And they were going home. The warship was in chaos. Jake had spent weeks letting the Velethians think he was just an amusing, semi-intelligent pet. Now, alarms blared in every corridor, lights flickered wildly, and the sleek, pristine control room was filled with frantic, clicking voices. The ship's engines roared to life beneath his feet, a deep vibration coursing through the metal floors. He had done what no other captured creature had. He'd taken control. The command interface projected an array of alien symbols, flashing warnings he didn't fully understand. But he didn't need to. He had already overridden their navigation system, forcing the ship into a new trajectory, one leading straight to Earth. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Jake turned just in time to see two armored Velethian guards storm into the command center, weapons raised. Their sleek, curved rifles pulsed with glowing energy, locking onto him. Jake grinned. You really don't want to do this. The first guard didn't hesitate. A pulse round hissed through the air, but Jake was already moving. He ducked, rolled, and hurled the sparking remains of a dismantled drone at the second guard's face. The alien stumbled, its shot going wide, striking a control panel that erupted in a shower of blue sparks. Using the distraction, Jake lunged, yanking the first guard's rifle from its grasp. The alien was strong, but Jake had leverage and desperation. With a sharp twist, he pried the weapon free and swung the stock hard into the guard's head. The Velethian crumpled, unconscious before it hit the ground. The second one hesitated. That was all Jake needed. He leveled the stolen weapon at its chest. Drop it, he ordered. The alien hesitated, glancing at the damaged controls. It knew. They all knew. Their ship was no longer theirs. Slowly it lowered its rifle. Smart choice, Jake muttered, kicking the weapon out of reach. He turned back to the console, scanning the projections. The ship was fast, but Earth was still days away at their current speed. He needed more than just navigation control. he needed to take down their entire chain of command. The ship trembled again as another system malfunction warning flashed. Good. He had started a fire. Now he just needed to fan the flames. He moved quickly, shutting down access to auxiliary control systems, locking doors, rerouting power. The Velithians would be scrambling now, trying to regain control. But they wouldn't. Jake had fought enough wars to know that brute force alone didn't win battles. It was about strategy, about turning an enemy's strengths into weaknesses. The Velithians were powerful, technologically advanced, but they had one glaring vulnerability. They had never fought a human before. Velithians were used to order, efficiency. They relied on protocols, on structured command chains. Jake had spent his life thriving in chaos. And right now, he was about to make their worst nightmare a reality. As expected, the ship's High Council didn't waste time. Within minutes, a booming announcement echoed through the ship's intercom. The Velithian language was layered with urgency, with sharp bursts of sound that indicated high-level command directives. A second later, his translation drone sputtered to life. Human. You have disrupted a vessel of the Velithian Dominion. You have demonstrated capability. We wish to negotiate. Jake chuckled. Now you want to talk? He activated the comms, not bothering to hide the amusement in his voice. Let me guess. You want me to surrender? Maybe go back in my cage? Silence. Then, we miscalculated. Damn right you did. The comm line crackled, and then another voice joined in, this one smoother, more deliberate. A leader. VIPER. We know your history now. Your abilities. You are an anomaly among your species. But this is not a war you can win alone. Stand down, and we will return you to your homeworld unharmed. Jake's grip tightened around the rifle. Oh, I'm not standing down. And this isn't a war. This is a rescue mission, mine. A pause. Then, you will not make it home alive. Jake smirked. Try me. Then he cut the comms. He didn't need to hear their threats. He had already made up his mind. The next few hours were a blur of calculated sabotage. He moved through the ship's corridors like a shadow, evading patrols, disabling key systems. He knew they would try to regain control, but every step he took ensured they wouldn't. He rerouted oxygen flow in certain sections, forcing entire squads to retreat. He triggered emergency lockdowns on key security sectors, isolating their forces. He hacked into their internal communications, flooding them with false alerts, making them chase ghosts. They were unraveling. And then, finally, he found what he was looking for. The ship's primary hangar. Rows of sleek, black Velithian fighters lined the bay, their engines humming faintly in standby mode. They were smaller than human aircraft, almost insect-like in design, with curved, aerodynamic wings and no visible cockpit. Jake ran his hands along the hull of one. Now this, he muttered, is more my style. Before he could climb in, another figure entered the hangar. Professor Squid. Jake tensed, raising his stolen weapon. But the alien didn't attack. It simply stood there, watching him. Then, in English, "You are more dangerous than we believed." Jake snorted. "Yeah, I get that a lot." A pause. Then, "If you leave, they will come for your world. They will see humanity as a threat." Jake's smirk faded. He had considered that. The Velithians weren't just an exploration species. They were a dominion. A conquering force. If they saw humans as equals, they might open negotiations. But if they saw them as a problem... He exhaled sharply. "Then tell them one thing." Professor Squid tilted its head. Jake stepped into the fighter's cockpit, the controls lighting up as if recognizing him. "Tell them they should have never put VIPER in a cage." Then, with a deafening roar, the ship launched out of the hangar, straight toward Earth. The fighter screamed through the void, stars streaking past in a blur as Jake pushed the alien craft to its limits. The controls were unlike anything he had ever flown, intuitive, almost organic, responding to his movements before he even finished thinking them. Good. Because he was about to make history. Behind him, the Velithian warship had stopped pursuing. Either they were too busy containing the chaos he had left behind, or they had decided he wasn't worth chasing. But Jake wasn't naive. If they let him go now, it was only because they wanted to see where he would lead them. And he knew exactly where he was going. The cockpit display pulsed as he neared the outer edge of the solar system. A warning in alien script flashed across the interface, something about gravitational interference. But Jake ignored it. Ahead, a bright blue dot grew larger by the second. Home. He took a breath, his fingers tightening on the controls. If the Velithians thought they were just going to waltz in and claim Earth like another specimen in their collection, they were in for a nasty surprise. Jake activated the fighter's communications array. The tech was leagues beyond human systems, but he had spent enough time around the Velithians to recognize the symbols for transmit and frequency. He cycled through known military channels, hoping, praying, that someone would be listening. "Mayday, Mayday," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "This is Captain Jake Carter, United States Air Force, Callsign VIPER. Do you copy?" Silence. Static. Then, a burst of garbled transmission. A second later, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Carter? Jesus Christ, is that you?" Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Damn good to hear your voice, Control. Where the hell have you been? We thought you were dead." "Yeah, well, turns out I was a house cat for some squid-faced aliens for a while. Listen, no time to explain. I'm bringing company. Big, ugly, and very interested in Earth." A pause. Then, "Understood. Scrambling interceptors. Welcome home, Viper." Jake grinned. "Damn right." The fighter hit the atmosphere like a meteor, flames licking at its sleek black hull as he angled toward the nearest airbase. A squadron of Earth's finest jets was already airborne, their pilots probably wondering what the hell they were looking at. Jake switched to an open channel. "Friendly, I repeat, friendly. Don't shoot." A beat of silence, then. "Captain Carter, you're flying an unidentified craft in restricted airspace. Explain yourself." Jake sighed. "Long story. Let's just say I borrowed it." His fighter slowed as it neared the airbase, and within minutes he was back on solid ground. The moment he popped the cockpit, armed personnel swarmed, weapons raised. Jake raised his hands. "Easy, fellas. You're pointing those things in the wrong direction." A figure pushed through the soldiers, General Mitchell, a man Jake had known since his first days in the program. His face was a mix of shock, relief, and suspicion. "Captain Carter," Mitchell said slowly. "What the hell is going on?" Jake smirked. "You might want to sit down for this one." The debriefing lasted hours. He told them everything: the abduction, the Velithian research, the warship, his escape. By the time he was done, the room was silent. Mitchell exhaled. "You're telling me an alien warship knows exactly where Earth is now?" Jake leaned back. "Yeah. But here's the thing." The general raised an eyebrow. "They're not sure what to do about us." Mitchell frowned. "Explain." Jake sat forward. "They thought I was just another animal. A pet. A specimen. But when they found out who I was, who we are, they hesitated. Because they don't know if we're prey or a problem." The general nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" Jake grinned. "I think we just got promoted from zoo exhibit to potential threat." Silence. Then Mitchell stood, turning to one of his aides. "Get me a meeting with the Joint Chiefs. And someone call NASA, we need to talk defense strategy." Jake stretched, exhaustion finally creeping in. "So, do I get my old jet back, or do I have to keep this one?" Mitchell gave him a look. "You're not flying that alien thing anywhere." Jake shrugged. "Shame. Handles like a dream." As he stepped outside, looking up at the sky, he knew things would never be the same. The Velithians would be watching. But so would Earth. And if they ever came back thinking humanity would roll over, well, they should have never put VIPER in a cage.